The red recording light blinked mercilessly as Serafina Holloway stared across the polished studio table at Marcus Chun, Boston's most ruthless entertainment reporter. His question hung in the air like a loaded weapon. "So, Serafina, when can we expect wedding bells for you and Maximilian Ashford?" She felt Maximilian's hand squeeze her knee under the table, his practiced smile never wavering for the cameras. 3 months of this charade had been 3 months too many. "Actually, Marcus, there won't be any wedding bells." The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Maximilian's grip tightened painfully, but Serafina continued. "I'm calling off our engagement." Effective immediately, the studio fell silent except for the hum of equipment. Marcus leaned forward like a predator sensing blood. "This is quite unexpected, Serafina. Can you tell our viewers why?" "Because I refuse to marry someone who sees me as a business acquisition rather than a human being." Maximilian's composure cracked. "Serafina, you're obviously under stress from the company pressures." "The only pressure I'm under is sitting right next to me." She turned to face the camera directly. "I'm Serafina Holloway, and I make my own choices." She unclipped her microphone and walked off the set, leaving chaos in her wake. 2 hours later, Serafina sat in her corner office on the 42nd floor of Holloway Pharmaceuticals, watching her phone explode with notifications. The interview had already gone viral. Her assistant knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "Your mother called 6 times. Your father wants to see you immediately. And there are 17 reporters in the lobby." Serafina closed her eyes. The Holloway family image was everything to her parents. This public spectacle would be seen as the ultimate betrayal. Also, her assistant continued hesitantly. "The annual charity ball is tomorrow night. The press will expect you to have a date after what happened today." The charity ball. 500 of Boston's elite would be watching, waiting to see if she'd crawl back to Maximilian or appear alone in defeat. Neither option appealed to her. "Get me the night shift supervisor. I need to speak with someone about building maintenance." Her assistant looked confused but complied. 20 minutes later, a middle-aged man in a maintenance uniform appeared at her door. "Miss Holloway? I'm Jim Patterson, night shift supervisor. You wanted to see me? I need to speak with one of your employees. The man who cleans this floor during the night shift. Tall, dark hair, probably early 30s. Jim scratched his head. "That'd be Caspian Rivers. Good worker, keeps to himself mostly. Real smart guy, though he doesn't say much." "Is there a problem with his work?" "No problem. I need to speak with him." "Is he working today?" "He comes in at 10 p.m. "But Miss Holloway, if you don't mind me asking, what do you need with our janitor?" Serafina had been asking herself the same question. She'd noticed Caspian during her late nights at the office over the past month. There was something different about him, something that didn't quite fit with his job description. The way he carried himself, the intelligence in his eyes when he thought no one was looking, the fact that he seemed to understand complex business conversations he overheard while emptying trash cans. "Send him to my office when he arrives tonight. And Jim, this conversation stays between us." After Jim left, Serafina paced her office. This was insane. She was considering asking the night janitor to escort her to the most important social event of the year. But after months of Maximilian treating her like a trophy and years of her parents orchestrating her life, she wanted to make a choice that was completely, utterly her own. At 10:15 p.m., there was a soft knock on her door. "Come in." Caspian Rivers entered, pushing his cleaning cart. Up close, she noticed details she'd missed before. His hands were too smooth for manual labor, his posture too confident for someone in a subservient position. When he looked at her directly, his dark blue eyes held an intensity that made her breath catch. "You wanted to see me, Miss Holloway?" His voice was educated, refined even. Definitely not what she'd expected from someone in his position. "I have an unusual request. Tomorrow night is our company's annual charity ball. I need an escort, and I'd like you to accompany me." If he was surprised, he didn't show it. Instead, he studied her face carefully, as if trying to solve a puzzle. "May I ask why you're asking me specifically?" "Because you're the only person in this building who hasn't tried to tell me what to do or who I should be." Something shifted in his expression, though she couldn't identify what. "I should mention that this would be a very public event. There will be photographers, reporters, people from your social circle. Are you prepared for that kind of attention?" The question struck her as oddly sophisticated for a janitor, but she was too committed to her impulsive decision to back down now. I've been dealing with that kind of attention my entire life. The question is whether you're prepared for it. Caspian was quiet for a long moment, his gaze never leaving her face. When he finally spoke, there was something almost calculating in his voice. Yes, Miss Holloway. I'll accompany you to the charity ball. As he left her office, Serafina felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. She'd just made the most spontaneous decision of her carefully controlled life. What she didn't know was that she'd also just invited her greatest enemy to the most important night of the year. You clean up well for a janitor. Serafina's breath caught as Caspian approached the limousine outside her Beacon Hill mansion. The transformation was startling. Gone were the maintenance coveralls, replaced by a perfectly tailored black tuxedo that emphasized his broad shoulders and lean frame. His dark hair was styled back, and he moved with a confidence that seemed entirely natural. You'd be surprised what a good rental place can accomplish, he replied, though something in his eyes suggested this wasn't his first formal event. The ride to the Four Seasons ballroom was charged with intention she hadn't expected. Every time their hands accidentally brushed, every sidelong glance in the dim lighting of the car felt electric. This was supposed to be a statement of independence, not whatever this was becoming. There's something you should know, Serafina said as they pulled up to the hotel. My ex-fiancé will be here tonight, along with half of Boston's social elite who think I've lost my mind. Have you? The question was direct, challenging. She turned to meet his gaze. Probably. His smile was the first genuine expression she'd seen from him. Good. Sanity is overrated. The ballroom erupted in whispers the moment they entered. Serafina felt hundreds of eyes tracking their movement, heard fragments of conversations that stopped mid-sentence as they passed. The charity ball was always a spectacle, but tonight she was the main attraction. Serafina, darling. Her mother materialized beside them, her smile brittle as glass. And this must be your friend. Mother, this is Caspian Rivers. Caspian, my mother, Victoria Holloway. Caspian extended his hand with practiced ease. Mrs. Holloway, it's a pleasure. Your daughter speaks of you often. The lie rolled off his tongue so smoothly that even Serafina almost believed it. Victoria's smile became marginally less frozen. How lovely. And what do you do, Mr. Rivers? I work for your company, actually. Maintenance and facility management. The silence that followed was deafening. Victoria's composure slipped for just a moment before she recovered. How interesting. I see Councilman Bradley across the room. I simply must speak with him. She fled with as much dignity as someone fleeing could manage. That went well, Caspian observed. You have no idea what you've walked into, do you? I'm beginning to get the picture. The orchestra began playing, and couples moved onto the dance floor. Serafina felt suddenly self-conscious. She'd attended dozens of these events, but never with someone who wasn't pre-approved by her family's social calendar. Would you like to dance? Caspian asked. Before she could answer, he'd taken her hand and led her onto the floor. His movements were assured, practiced, as if he'd been dancing at charity balls his entire life. The contradiction bothered her more than she wanted to admit. Where did a maintenance worker learn to waltz? YouTube is very educational. She didn't believe him, but before she could press the issue, they were interrupted. Serafina. Maximilian appeared beside them, his face a mask of controlled fury. He looked like he'd stepped off the cover of a magazine, all golden hair and expensive cologne, but his eyes were cold. Max. Her voice was steady, though her heart was racing. I think we need to talk. Privately. I don't think we do. Maximilian's gaze shifted to Caspian with undisguised contempt. I'm sorry, we haven't been introduced. Maximilian Ashford. He didn't extend his hand. Caspian Rivers. The way Maximilian's eyes narrowed suggested he'd already done his research. Ah yes, the janitor. How quaint. Max, don't. Don't what? Point out that you're making a fool of yourself? Your little stunt yesterday was embarrassing enough, but this. He gestured toward Caspian. This is beneath even you. Caspian stepped forward slightly, his posture shifting in a way that seemed almost threatening. I think the lady asked you to leave. I wasn't talking to you. You are now. The tension between the two men was palpable. Other couples had stopped dancing to watch, sensing drama. Gentlemen, please. Serafina stepped between them. Max, go find someone else to bother. Caspian and I are dancing. Maximilian's perfect facade cracked completely. This isn't over, Serafina. When you come to your senses, I might not be so forgiving. He stalked away, leaving whispers in his wake. "Charming guy," Caspian said. "I can see why you were engaged." Were being the operative phrase. They resumed dancing, but the moment had shifted something between them. She was acutely aware of his hand on her waist, the way he guided her through the steps with subtle pressure. When he spun her out and pulled her back, she found herself closer than before, close enough to catch the scent of his cologne and see the flecks of gray in his blue eyes. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for standing up to him. You didn't need me to. You were handling him fine. Still, it's been a long time since someone had my back like that." Something flickered across his face, an expression she couldn't read. Guilt, maybe? Or regret? "Serafina, there's something you should know about me." "Later," she interrupted. "Right now, I just want to pretend this is normal. Can we do that?" He nodded, though his expression remained troubled. What Serafina didn't see was the way Caspian's free hand slipped a microtransmitter into the arrangement of flowers at their table as they passed. She didn't notice how his eyes cataloged security camera positions and exit routes. She was too caught up in the fantasy of dancing with someone who saw her as more than a business arrangement. But Caspian noticed everything, even as he fought against the growing warmth in his chest every time she smiled at him. This was supposed to be simple. Infiltrate, gather evidence, destroy the family that had destroyed his. Falling for the target was never part of the plan. As the music swelled around them, neither realized they were both living a lie that would soon shatter everything. 3 weeks after the charity ball, Serafina found herself staying later at the office than ever before. She told herself it was because of the quarterly reports, but the truth was simpler and more complicated. She wanted to see Caspian. Their encounters had become a carefully choreographed dance. He would appear around 11 p.m. to empty her trash, and they would talk. Sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for an hour. He never overstepped boundaries, never made assumptions about what the charity ball had meant, but there was an undeniable current between them that grew stronger each night. "Working late again, Miss Holloway?" She looked up from her computer to find him in her doorway, cleaning cart beside him. The sight still struck her as incongruous. Everything about him suggested intelligence and education that didn't match his job. "Someone has to keep this place running." "What's your excuse?" "Same as always. Buildings don't clean themselves." He moved efficiently around her office, but she noticed his movements had become more purposeful lately. Tonight, she watched him more carefully and caught something that made her breath stop. When he thought she wasn't looking, his fingers moved across his phone with lightning speed, photographing documents that had been left on her desk. "Caspian." He froze, phone still in his hand. "What are you doing?" For a moment, something dangerous flickered across his face. Then his expression shifted back to the mild janitor persona she'd grown accustomed to. "Sorry, I was just checking the time. I didn't mean to disturb your work." The lie was smooth, but she'd seen what she'd seen. Before she could respond, her office door opened without a knock. "Serafina, I need to speak with you." Dr. Victor Brennan entered with the confidence of a man who owned everything he surveyed. Serafina had known him her entire life. He'd been her father's business partner and closest friend since before she was born. Silver-haired and distinguished, with the kind of smile that made patients trust him implicitly, he was the real power behind Holloway Pharmaceuticals. "Uncle Victor, it's rather late for a visit. I was reviewing some concerning reports." His pale gray eyes shifted to Caspian, who had resumed cleaning with studied nonchalance. "Perhaps we should speak privately. This is Caspian Rivers, one of our maintenance staff." "Caspian, Dr. Brennan, our chief medical officer." Caspian straightened respectfully. "Dr. Brennan, sir." Brennan's gaze lingered on Caspian's face with an intensity that seemed excessive for a janitor. "Rivers, that's an interesting name. Are you from Boston originally, Mr. Rivers?" "No, sir. I moved here a few months ago for work." "I see. And where did you work before?" The questions were casual, but Serafina sensed an undercurrent of suspicion. Caspian seemed to sense it too. His posture shifted almost imperceptibly. "Various places. I tend to move around a lot." "How fascinating. Well, don't let us keep you from your work." It was a dismissal. Caspian nodded to both of them and left, but not before catching Serafina's eye with a look that seemed to convey both warning and apology. "Interesting choice of company you're keeping these days," Brennan said once they were alone. "He's an employee. I was working late. He was doing his job." "Of course. But perhaps you should be more careful about who you trust, my dear." There have been some concerning developments lately. What kind of developments? Brennan moved to her window, gazing out at the Boston skyline. Someone has been accessing our secure servers. Files have been copied, documents photographed. We're dealing with corporate espionage. Serafina's blood chilled. The image of Caspian with his phone flashed through her mind. Do you know who? Not yet, but I'm implementing additional security measures immediately. Background checks on all personnel, enhanced surveillance, restricted access to sensitive materials. He turned back to her. I'd hate to think someone was using their position here to get close to you for ulterior motives. The implication was clear. Serafina forced her expression to remain neutral. I'm sure you'll handle it appropriately. I always do. After Brennan left, Serafina sat in her empty office, mind racing. Either Caspian was exactly what he appeared to be and Brennan was paranoid, or the man she'd been growing closer to each night was lying about everything. 2 floors below, Caspian sat in the building's server room, fingers flying across a laptop connected to the mainframe through carefully concealed hardware. The photographs from Serafina's desk had been promising, but he needed deeper access to find what he was looking for. His parents' death certificate listed cause of death as automobile accident, but Caspian knew better. Dr. Thaddeus and Elena Thorne Rivers had been biochemists who discovered something that someone had killed them for. The clues led back to Holloway Pharmaceuticals and a man named Victor Brennan. For months, he'd been systematically accessing files, looking for evidence of the illegal drug trials his parents had uncovered. Tonight's breach had yielded something significant: references to Protocol 7, a clinical trial that had been hastily terminated and all records allegedly destroyed. But records were never truly destroyed, and Caspian was very good at finding digital ghosts. His phone buzzed with a security alert. Brennan had just implemented new access restrictions on the entire system. Somehow, the doctor suspected infiltration. Caspian had minutes before his current connection would be detected and traced. He uploaded the malware he'd spent weeks crafting, a program that would give him backdoor access even after security upgrades. But as he prepared to disconnect, a file caught his attention. Patient records from 2018, all marked with the same notation: adverse effects, terminated. 47 patients, all dead within 6 months of starting an experimental medication. All cases buried in paperwork and legal settlements. The file was labeled Project Clearwater, and the supervising physician was Dr. Victor Brennan. Caspian's hands shook as he copied the data. This was it. This was what his parents had died for discovering. But as he prepared to leave, footsteps echoed in the hallway outside. Security rounds weren't scheduled for another hour. Someone was coming specifically for this room. He quickly shut down his equipment and slipped into the maintenance persona he'd perfected. When the door opened, he was replacing a burned-out fluorescent bulb. Working late tonight, Rivers? It was Marcus Webb, head of security, a man whose suspicious nature matched his military background. Electrical problems on the 38th floor. Had to trace the issue back to the source. Webb's eyes swept the server room, noting everything. Find what you were looking for? The question seemed loaded with double meaning. Just a loose connection. Easy fix. Good. Dr. Brennan wants all maintenance issues resolved quickly. He doesn't like disruptions. As Webb left, Caspian realized his time was running out. Brennan suspected something. Security was tightening, and worst of all, he was developing feelings for the daughter of the family he'd sworn to destroy. The smart play would be to disappear tonight, take what evidence he had, and expose Holloway Pharmaceuticals from a safe distance. But that would mean abandoning Serafina to whatever game Brennan was playing. And despite every rational thought in his head, Caspian wasn't ready to do that. Caspian stared at the photograph on his apartment wall, the same one he'd looked at every morning for the past 8 months. Dr. Thaddeus Thorne Rivers and Dr. Elena Santos Rivers stood together in their laboratory, wearing matching white coats and proud smiles. The picture had been taken just weeks before their deaths. He'd been Caspian Thorne Rivers then, a doctoral candidate in biochemistry at MIT, following in his parents' footsteps. Now he was Caspian Rivers, night janitor and infiltrator, sleeping in a studio apartment in Southie and living on instant ramen and revenge. The memory hit him with sudden clarity, as it often did in the early morning hours. Caspian, you need to see this. His mother's voice had been tight with fear when she called him that October evening in 2018. He'd driven to their Cambridge home immediately, finding both parents hunched over Elena's laptop in their home office. "What is it? Your father and I have been consulting on a clinical trial for Holloway Pharmaceuticals, a new cardiac medication called Cardiomax. The preliminary results looked promising, but..." Elena had pulled up patient files on her screen. Names, ages, medical histories, all leading to the same devastating outcome. 47 patients enrolled in the trial. 31 developed severe liver complications within 3 months. 16 died. Thaddeus had been pacing, his usually calm demeanor shattered. "We recommended immediate termination of the trial and full disclosure to the FDA. But Dr. Brennan overruled us. He buried the adverse reports and falsified the data. Brennan is still pushing the drug toward market approval," Elena had continued. "He's using the Holloway name and reputation to fast-track FDA approval, but the family has no idea what he's really doing." "You have to report this," Caspian had said. "We tried going through company channels. Brennan blocked every attempt. He controls all research data, and he's convinced the Holloway family that we're being overly cautious." Thaddeus had pulled out a thick folder. "We've been documenting everything, building a case to take directly to the FDA and the Justice Department. But we need more evidence, proof that Brennan is systematically covering up adverse effects. Is it just this one drug? We think there are others. Brennan has been running his own research division within Holloway for years, using their resources and reputation while keeping the family in the dark about his methods." That had been their last conversation. 3 days later, police called to inform him that his parents had died in a single-car accident on Route 2. "Brake failure," they said. "Tragic and unexpected." But Caspian knew better. The timing was too convenient, the circumstances too clean. He'd spent the next 2 years gathering resources, learning skills he'd never imagined needing. Corporate infiltration, computer hacking, surveillance techniques. He'd become someone his parents wouldn't recognize, all in service of exposing the man who'd killed them. Now, looking at their photograph, he wondered what they would think of his methods, what they would think of his growing feelings for Serafina Holloway. The secure phone he'd purchased under a false identity buzzed with an encrypted message. His contact in the FBI, Agent Sarah Chun, had been feeding him information about ongoing investigations into pharmaceutical fraud. New development. DOJ opening investigation into Holloway Pharmaceuticals. Multiple whistleblower complaints about clinical trial irregularities. Need your evidence ASAP. Caspian typed back quickly, still gathering proof. Need more time. Time is luxury you don't have. My sources say someone inside company is planning major document purge. Whatever you're looking for might disappear soon. The message sent a chill through him. If Brennan was destroying evidence, it meant he suspected infiltration. The net was closing. Meanwhile, 3 miles away in her Beacon Hill townhouse, Serafina couldn't sleep. Brennan's warnings about corporate espionage had been echoing in her mind for days, along with the image of Caspian photographing documents in her office. She'd spent the evening reviewing company files she'd never paid close attention to before, looking for anything that might explain the inconsistencies she'd started noticing. Her family had always left the medical and research operations to Brennan, trusting his expertise completely. But trust was a luxury she could no longer afford. She pulled up the company's clinical trial database on her laptop. Most of the recent trials were routine, testing existing medications for new applications or conducting standard safety reviews. But several projects showed unusual patterns. Trials that had been terminated early without explanation. Patient populations that seemed oddly specific. Multiple studies with the same supervising physician, Dr. Victor Brennan. One file caught her attention, Project Clearwater, terminated in 2018. The official reason listed was insufficient patient enrollment, but when she cross-referenced it with financial records, the project had received millions in funding and had recruited over 50 participants. She searched for the principal investigators and found 2 names that made her stomach drop, Dr. Thaddeus Thorne Rivers and Dr. Elena Santos Rivers. Both listed as deceased, dates of death just weeks after the project termination. Coincidences like that didn't exist in her world. Serafina pulled up news reports from 2018, searching for any mention of the Thorne Rivers family. The obituaries were brief, clinical. Prominent biochemist died in car accident. Survived by son Caspian Thorne Rivers. Thorne Rivers, not Rivers. Her blood turned to ice as the connections crystallized. Caspian's real name, his parents' connection to Holloway Pharmaceuticals, their mysterious deaths just after working on a terminated trial. Everything he'd told her was a lie. But as the shock wore off, it was replaced by something else, understanding. If his parents had died because of something they discovered about her company, his deception suddenly made sense. The question was whether he saw her as complicit in whatever had happened or as another victim of Brennan's manipulations. Her phone rang, startling her from her thoughts. The caller ID showed Brennan's number. "Serafina, I hope I didn't wake you." "No, I was awake. What's wrong?" "I'm afraid we have a situation. Our security team has identified the source of our data breach. One of the maintenance staff has been systematically accessing confidential files." Her heart pounded, but she kept her voice steady. "Do you know who?" "A man named Caspian Rivers. Though that may not be his real name. I've called an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning. We'll need to involve law enforcement." "Uncle Victor, shouldn't we investigate more thoroughly before involving the police? If this person has stolen data, we need to know what they have before it becomes public." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Always thinking strategically, my dear. Yes, perhaps you're right. Let me handle this quietly for now. But Serafina, I want you to stay away from this man. If he's been using his position to get close to you, he could be dangerous." After hanging up, Serafina realized she was at a crossroads. She could report Caspian's true identity to Brennan and let company security handle it. Or she could confront him herself and demand the truth about what he'd discovered. The smart choice was obvious. The safe choice was clear. But as she thought about the way he'd looked at her during their late-night conversations, the gentleness in his voice when he defended her against Maximilian, she realized that safety had never been her priority. Truth was, Serafina arrived at the office before dawn, her mind churning with questions that demanded answers. She'd spent the remainder of the night researching everything she could find about Thaddeus and Elena Thorne Rivers, and each new piece of information painted a more disturbing picture. The couple had been respected biochemists with impeccable reputations. Their death had been covered briefly in academic journals, but the circumstances had never been questioned publicly. A tragic accident that removed two inconvenient voices just when Holloway Pharmaceuticals needed them silenced. She was reviewing patient mortality reports when her office door opened. Caspian entered with his cleaning card, following the same routine they'd established over the past month. But everything had changed. "You're here early," he said, his voice carrying the same warm tone that had become so familiar. "I could say the same about you. Though I suppose your schedule is flexible when you're not actually here to clean." Caspian froze, his hand halfway to emptying her wastebasket. When he straightened and looked at her, the mask finally dropped. The deference disappeared, replaced by the sharp intelligence she'd always sensed beneath the surface. "How long have you known?" "Since last night." Caspian Thorne Rivers, son of Dr. Thaddeus and Elena Thorne Rivers, the couple who died investigating clinical trial irregularities for this company. He abandoned the cleaning card entirely and sat across from her desk. Without the pretense, his entire presence shifted. The man facing her now was educated, confident, and carrying a weight of grief that made her chest ache. "They didn't die in an accident. I figured as much. The timing was rather convenient. They were murdered because they discovered that Victor Brennan has been conducting illegal drug trials using Holloway resources. Trials that killed dozens of people while he falsified data to get FDA approval." Serafina felt the ground shifting beneath her. "That's a serious accusation. It's a provable fact." Caspian pulled out a tablet and placed it on her desk. The screen showed medical records, patient files, and correspondence that painted a horrifying picture of systematic fraud and cover-ups. Project Clearwater was just the beginning. "Your Dr. Brennan has been running unauthorized clinical trials for years, using vulnerable patient populations and burying adverse effects. When my parents threatened to expose him, he had them killed." "Show me." For the next hour, Caspian walked her through evidence that made her stomach turn. Falsified lab results, buried autopsy reports, patient deaths that had been reclassified as unrelated medical events, all bearing Brennan's signature and approval. "My parents tried to work within the system," Caspian continued. "They reported their concerns to company leadership, tried to get the trials shut down through proper channels. But Brennan controlled all the information flow. He convinced your family that my parents were being alarmist and overly cautious. My father never mentioned any of this. Because Brennan made sure he never saw the real data. Your family has been kept in the dark about the research division's actual activities for years. Serafina studied a patient file that showed a healthy 32-year-old woman who died within weeks of starting an experimental cardiac medication. The death had been attributed to an undiagnosed genetic condition, but the lab work told a different story. How long have you been planning this infiltration? 2 years. I needed access to the secure servers, the archived files that Brennan thought he'd destroyed. Working here was the only way to get close enough. And getting close to me? Was that part of the plan too? Caspian's composure cracked for the first time. No, that was never supposed to happen. But it did happen. Yes. The simple admission hung between them, weighted with implications neither was ready to explore. So what now? Serafina asked. You have your evidence. You can expose Brennan and destroy my family's reputation in the process. Your family's reputation isn't my concern. Justice for my parents is. Even if it means destroying innocent people. Are you innocent, Serafina? You're the heir to this company. How much did you really not know? The question hit like a physical blow. She'd spent her entire life assuming that her family's business was legitimate, that her wealth and privilege were built on helping people rather than harming them. I didn't know, she said quietly. But ignorance isn't the same as innocence, is it? Before Caspian could answer, her office door burst open. Dr. Brennan entered with 2 security guards, his usual calm demeanor replaced by cold fury. Mr. Thorne Rivers. Or should I say, Mr. Rivers? I was wondering when you'd surface. Caspian stood slowly, his body coiled with tension. Dr. Brennan. Still murdering patients for profit. Still making wild accusations without proof. I see. Just like your parents. I have proof. 2 years' worth of documentation about your illegal trials. Brennan's smile was arctic. You have stolen proprietary information obtained through criminal infiltration. Information that will be dismissed as fabricated evidence from a clearly unstable individual seeking revenge for his parents' tragic accident. Accident. Caspian's voice was dangerous. You had them killed. I had them terminated from the project due to their inability to follow protocols. Their subsequent death was an unfortunate coincidence. Serafina stood abruptly. Uncle Victor, what the hell is going on here? I'm sorry you had to learn about this situation, my dear. But Mr. Thorne Rivers has been using you to gain access to confidential company information. Everything between you has been a lie designed to exploit your emotions. The words were designed to hurt, and they succeeded. Serafina looked at Caspian, searching his face for denial that didn't come. Not everything, he said quietly. Enough. Brennan gestured to the security guards. Mr. Thorne Rivers is trespassing on company property with stolen credentials. Escort him out and contact the police. Wait. Serafina's voice cut through the tension. I want to see this evidence he claims to have. Serafina, you're emotionally compromised. This man has been manipulating you for weeks. Then let me see for myself how thoroughly I've been manipulated. Brennan's expression shifted, calculating. Very well. But this conversation happens in my office, with legal counsel present. And Mr. Thorne Rivers remains in security custody until we determine the extent of his crimes. As the security guards moved toward Caspian, he caught Serafina's eye. Whatever he tells you about me, whatever lies he constructs, remember that my parents died trying to protect people from him. Don't let their deaths be meaningless. I won't, she promised, though she wasn't sure if she was lying to him or to herself. As they led Caspian away, Brennan placed a paternal hand on her shoulder. I know this is difficult, dear, but you'll see that everything I've done has been to protect our family and our company. Serafina nodded, but her mind was already working. The evidence Caspian had shown her was damning, but it was also incomplete. If she was going to learn the truth about her company and her family's legacy, she needed to see everything, even if that truth destroyed everything she thought she knew about the people she trusted most. The headlines hit Boston's morning news cycle like a tsunami. Holloway heiress duped by corporate spy. Pharmaceutical giant under attack from delusional saboteur. Romance or espionage. The Serafina Holloway scandal. Serafina stared at her laptop screen in her home office, watching her reputation disintegrate in real time. The media narrative was brutally efficient. She was either a naive victim manipulated by a cunning infiltrator or a willing accomplice in corporate espionage. Neither version painted her as competent to lead a company. Her phone buzzed with another call from her father. She'd been ignoring him for 3 days, ever since Brennan's emergency board meeting where she'd been presented with a completely different version of events than what Caspian had shown her. According to Brennan's carefully orchestrated presentation, Caspian Thorne Rivers was a disturbed individual who'd fabricated evidence to support his delusional beliefs about his parents' death. The clinical trial data he'd stolen had been manipulated and taken out of context. His infiltration of the company was a calculated attack designed to destroy Holloway Pharmaceuticals from within. The young man clearly suffered a psychological break after his parents' tragic accident, Brennan had explained to the board with practiced concern. Rather than accepting their death as the result of mechanical failure, he's created an elaborate conspiracy theory that positions our company as responsible. The board had listened with grave attention as Brennan presented psychiatric evaluations suggesting Caspian was mentally unstable, along with expert testimony about how easy it was to manipulate digital records. By the end of the meeting, the narrative was set. Holloway Pharmaceuticals was the victim of a sophisticated sabotage operation. But Serafina couldn't forget what she'd seen in those patient files. The deaths were real, documented, and suspicious in their timing and scope. Either Caspian had orchestrated the most elaborate fraud in corporate history, or Brennan was lying about everything. Her doorbell rang, interrupting her spiral of doubt. She wasn't expecting anyone, and given the media circus surrounding her life, visitors were unwelcome. Through the security monitor, she saw Maximilian standing on her doorstep, looking every inch the concerned former fiancé. Against her better judgment, she opened the door. "Max, what do you want?" "To help you." He stepped inside without invitation, his expression earnest. "Serafina, I know things ended badly between us, but seeing you being manipulated like this breaks my heart." "I'm not being manipulated. Aren't you? This Caspian character played you perfectly. He exploited your rebellion against our engagement, your need to prove your independence. He made you feel special while he was stealing company secrets." Maximilian moved closer, his voice dropping to the intimate tone he'd once used to charm her. "I've been investigating him, trying to understand how he got so close to you. Did you know he's been in and out of psychiatric facilities since his parents died? The man is genuinely unwell. Where did you get that information? Does it matter? What matters is that you're being used as a pawn in his vendetta against your family." Serafina studied his face, noting the practiced sincerity. "And I suppose you're offering to help me out of the goodness of your heart." "I'm offering to help because I care about you. Because despite everything that happened between us, I don't want to see you destroy yourself over a man who never cared about you." The manipulation was skillful, playing on her insecurities and doubts. But she'd learned to recognize the signs of being handled. "Get out, Max, Serafina. Be reasonable. Get out before I call security." After he left, she realized that Maximilian's visit hadn't been a coincidence. Someone had sent him, armed with just enough personal information to be convincing. The question was whether he was working with Brennan voluntarily or being manipulated himself. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "If you want the truth about your company, check the hidden partition on your office computer. Password, Elena 2018. Delete this message immediately." The phone number belonged to Caspian. Somehow, despite being in police custody, he'd found a way to contact her. That evening, Serafina returned to her office after hours, using her executive access to bypass the enhanced security Brennan had implemented. The building felt different now, charged with suspicion and secrets. She found the hidden partition exactly where Caspian had indicated. The password worked, revealing files that Brennan had thought were permanently deleted. Patient records, lab results, correspondence between researchers and regulatory officials. All of it painting a picture of systematic fraud dating back nearly a decade. But what made her blood run cold was a series of emails between Brennan and a man named Marcus Webb, the head of security. The messages were coded, but their meaning was clear enough. Webb had been tasked with resolving the Thorne Rivers problem in 2018. The resolution had been a car accident on a rainy October night. Her parents weren't involved. Her father genuinely believed Brennan was conducting legitimate research. But Brennan had been using their company, their reputation, and their resources to conduct illegal experiments while systematically eliminating anyone who threatened to expose him. A soft sound in the hallway made her freeze. Footsteps, moving slowly toward her office. She quickly copied the files to an encrypted drive and closed the hidden partition. "Working late again, my dear?" Brennan appeared in her doorway, his silver hair perfectly styled despite the late hour. Behind him stood Marcus Webb, whose military bearing seemed more menacing in the empty building. "Uncle Victor, I thought you'd gone home hours ago. I was reviewing security footage and noticed someone had accessed this floor after hours. Given our recent security concerns, I thought it best to investigate personally." His eyes moved to her computer screen, noting that she'd been accessing company files. "Find anything interesting?" "Just reviewing quarterly projections. I wanted to understand the full scope of our research operations." "Admirable dedication. Though I worry you're letting recent events cloud your judgment about the company's direction." Brennan moved into her office, Webb following like a shadow. The atmosphere felt charged with menace. "Perhaps it's time you took a step back from operational oversight, Serafina. Let the board handle the current crisis while you focus on your public relations challenges." "Are you suggesting I resign?" "I'm suggesting you trust the people who've been protecting this company long before you were old enough to understand its complexities." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Serafina realized she was completely alone with two men who'd already proven they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. "Of course, you're right as always." She shut down her computer and gathered her things, maintaining the facade of a chastened heiress accepting guidance from her elders. But as she left the building, she felt the weight of the encrypted drive in her pocket like a loaded weapon. Caspian had been right about everything. Her family's company was built on lies and murder, and she was the only person in a position to expose the truth. The question was whether she'd survive long enough to do it. That night, she sent a coded message to the number Caspian had used. "I believe you. What do we do now?" The response came quickly. "We fight back. But first, you need to disappear. They're planning to eliminate you too." As Serafina packed an overnight bag, she realized her privileged life was over. Everything she believed about herself, her family, and her future had been shattered. But for the first time since the charity ball, she felt like she was finally seeing clearly. The war for her company's soul was just beginning. Serafina had been hiding in the Fairmont Copley Plaza for 3 days when the explosion ripped through her Beacon Hill townhouse. She watched the news coverage from her hotel room, her hands shaking as reporters described the gas leak that had destroyed the historic property. The timing was too convenient to be accidental. If she hadn't followed Caspian's warning to disappear, she would have been inside when the house erupted in flames. Her secure phone buzzed with a message from the same untraceable number Caspian had been using. "Meet me at the old Charlestown Navy Yard. Pier 6. Come alone. Trust no one else." The location was exposed, dangerous, but she was running out of options. Brennan controlled the company, the board, and apparently the police investigation into Caspian's crimes. Her own family believed she was suffering from some kind of breakdown, manipulated by a disturbed criminal who'd exploited her emotional state. The pier was deserted when she arrived, fog rolling in from Boston Harbor to obscure the city lights. She waited in her car until a figure emerged from the shadows between shipping containers. Caspian looked different. Gone was any pretense of the janitor persona. He moved with the confidence of someone who'd spent years planning for this moment, dressed in dark clothing that suggested he'd been living rough since his escape from police custody. "How did you get away?" she asked as he slipped into the passenger seat. "I had help. People who've been watching Brennan for years, waiting for enough evidence to bring him down." "What people?" "FBI task force investigating pharmaceutical fraud. DEA agents tracking illegal drug distribution. FDA investigators who've been documenting safety violations. Your Dr. Brennan has made enemies across multiple agencies." Caspian pulled out a tablet and showed her surveillance footage of Brennan meeting with men in expensive suits outside a warehouse in East Boston. "This was taken last week. Brennan isn't just conducting illegal clinical trials. He's been selling experimental drug formulas to cartels, using Holloway resources to develop compounds that bypass FDA restrictions." The implications hit her like a physical blow. Drug cartels, synthetic opioids, designer stimulants, compounds that mimic controlled substances but aren't technically illegal yet. He's been running a pharmaceutical pipeline for organized crime, using your family's reputation as cover. The footage showed briefcases changing hands, samples being exchanged, handshakes between Brennan and men who looked nothing like legitimate business partners. My parents discovered this operation by accident. They were investigating clinical trial irregularities when they stumbled onto evidence of the cartel connections. That's why Brennan had them killed. They weren't just threatening to expose medical fraud. They could have brought down his entire criminal enterprise. Serafina felt sick. Everything she'd believed about her family's legacy was a lie. Holloway Pharmaceuticals wasn't just conducting questionable research. It was actively supplying drug cartels with weapons of mass addiction. The task force has been building a case for months, but they needed someone with inside access to provide the final pieces of evidence. Someone Brennan trusted completely. Me. You. But after tonight, that's no longer possible. The explosion at your house wasn't intended to look accidental. Brennan is moving to eliminate all potential threats, including you. As if summoned by their conversation, headlights appeared at the far end of the pier. Multiple vehicles moving fast, their beams cutting through the fog. We need to go? Now. Caspian was already moving, but Serafina hesitated. Where? Brennan controls everything. The police, the media, the company board. Even if we expose him, who's going to believe us? The people who've been waiting for this opportunity. The vehicles were closer now, and she could see they weren't police cars. Black SUVs with tinted windows, the kind of transportation that suggested private security rather than law enforcement. They ran toward the water, using shipping containers and dock equipment as cover. Behind them, car doors slammed and voices shouted orders in multiple languages. These weren't Brennan's usual corporate security team. Friends of yours from the pharmaceutical business? Serafina asked as they crouched behind a crane. Brennan's cartel partners. Apparently, they don't appreciate the attention we've been bringing to their operations. Gunshots echoed across the pier, bullets sparking off metal surfaces near their heads. This wasn't intimidation or corporate espionage anymore. These people intended to kill them both. Caspian pulled out a phone and sent a rapid series of text messages. I'm calling in backup, but we need to stay alive long enough for them to arrive. They moved from cover to cover, working their way toward the water's edge. The fog provided some concealment, but their pursuers knew the area and were systematically cutting off escape routes. There, Caspian pointed toward a small powerboat moored at the end of the pier. Can you drive one of those? I grew up on Cape Cod. I can handle a boat. They made a desperate sprint across the open pier, gunfire erupting around them. Serafina felt a bullet graze her shoulder as they dove into the boat, pain shooting down her arm as Caspian frantically worked to start the engine. The motor roared to life just as their pursuers reached the pier. More gunshots, but the boat was already pulling away from the dock, disappearing into the fog-shrouded harbor. Where are we going? Serafina shouted over the engine noise, steering toward open water. Coast Guard Station. I've got federal agents waiting there with arrest warrants for Brennan and his entire network. Behind them, she could see lights on the pier, hear voices coordinating some kind of pursuit. But the fog was thickening, and she knew these waters better than whoever was chasing them. As they raced across Boston Harbor, Caspian suddenly grabbed her hand. Serafina, I need you to know something. Everything I told you about my reasons for being there was true. But my feelings for you, what happened between us, that was never part of the plan. I know. Do you? Because when this is over, when Brennan is arrested and the truth comes out, your life is going to change completely. The company, your family's reputation, everything you thought you knew about your place in the world. She squeezed his hand tighter, steering through the fog toward the lights of the Coast Guard station. Then we'll figure out what comes next together. The sound of helicopter rotors approached through the fog, and suddenly the harbor was illuminated by searchlights. Federal agents, finally arriving with enough firepower to end Brennan's reign of terror. But as they approached the Coast Guard dock, Serafina realized that surviving the night was only the beginning. The real fight would be rebuilding everything that Brennan had corrupted, and doing it with the man who'd risked everything to expose the truth. Even if that truth had destroyed the life she'd always known. 6 months after Dr. Victor Brennan's arrest, Serafina stood before the largest gathering of pharmaceutical industry leaders, medical professionals, and government officials Boston had seen in decades. The federal courthouse steps were packed with reporters, cameras, and families of victims who had waited years for this moment. The FBI's investigation had uncovered a criminal enterprise that spanned continents. Brennan's network had infiltrated medical research facilities across 3 countries, using legitimate pharmaceutical companies as fronts for illegal drug development and distribution. The evidence Caspian had collected, combined with testimony from dozens of witnesses, had resulted in the largest pharmaceutical fraud case in Justice Department history. Today, Holloway Pharmaceuticals begins a new chapter, Serafina announced to the crowd. We are establishing a victim compensation fund of $500 million for families affected by illegal trials and fraudulent medications. Additionally, we're implementing the most stringent ethical oversight protocols in the industry. She paused, seeing familiar faces in the crowd. Families of patients who died in Brennan's experiments, researchers who'd been silenced or discredited for trying to expose the truth, and investigators who'd spent years building cases that had finally come to fruition. But money and protocols aren't enough. Trust must be earned through actions, not words. That's why Holloway Pharmaceuticals is partnering with the Thorn Rivers Foundation to ensure independent oversight of all our research operations. The foundation had been Caspian's idea, named in honor of his parents and dedicated to protecting research integrity. He'd declined any formal role in the company, preferring to work as an independent advocate, but his influence on the reforms had been absolute. After the press conference, Serafina found him waiting in her car, reading through reports from their latest audit findings. "How did it go?" he asked without looking up. 3 more companies have agreed to adopt our transparency protocols. The industry association is recommending our ethics framework as the new standard. Good. Though I suspect some of them are only cooperating because they're afraid of what else we might find. She studied his profile as he read, noting the way his brow furrowed when he encountered something concerning. The past 6 months had changed both of them in fundamental ways. The naive heiress and the vengeful infiltrator had evolved into something neither had expected, genuine partners in a mission larger than themselves. "The court approved the final settlement with the Ramirez family today," she said. "Their daughter would have been 25 this year." Caspian finally looked up from his reading. The pain in his eyes was still raw. It might always be. But it was balanced now by something that hadn't been there when she first met him: hope. "That's 47 families who've received justice. Your parents would be proud. They'd be proud of you too. What you've built from their company, what you've chosen to do with your position. It takes courage to burn down everything you inherited and build something better." The transformation of Holloway Pharmaceuticals had been painful and expensive. Half the board had resigned, multiple executives faced criminal charges, and several research divisions had been permanently shuttered. The company's market value had plummeted, and industry competitors had circled like vultures. But from the ashes, something unprecedented had emerged. A pharmaceutical company committed to absolute transparency, with patient safety as its only priority. Research protocols that other companies were now copying. A business model that proved profitability and ethics weren't mutually exclusive. "I've been thinking about something," Caspian said as they drove through the Boston streets. "The foundation is offering me a position in Geneva, overseeing international pharmaceutical regulations." Serafina's heart clenched, though she tried to keep her voice neutral. "That's an incredible opportunity." "It is. The kind of platform my parents dreamed of, the chance to prevent what happened to them from happening to other families. But it would mean leaving Boston, leaving the work we're doing here, leaving you." They'd been dancing around their relationship for months, neither willing to acknowledge that something profound had developed between them amid the chaos of scandal and reform. Their connection had been forged in crisis, tested by betrayal and loss, and strengthened by shared purpose. "You should take it," she said finally. "This is bigger than any personal considerations." "Is it?" He turned to face her. "Because I've spent 2 years of my life pursuing justice for my parents, and I finally understand what they would have wanted most. Not revenge, but a life worth living. A partnership built on trust and shared values. Someone to build a future with." "Caspian, I love you, Serafina. Not the heiress, not the company president, but the woman who risked everything to do what was right. The person who chose truth over comfort, justice over security." The words hung between them, weighted with months of unspoken feelings and carefully maintained boundaries. "I love you too," she whispered. "But our relationship began with lies. How do we know what's real?" "Because we chose to make it real. Every day since that night on the pier, We've chosen honesty over convenience, partnership over independence. That's not the foundation we started with, but it's the foundation we built." He reached for her hand, the same gesture that had meant so much during their secret meetings in her office. "Take the Geneva position," she said. "But take me with you." "What about Holloway Pharmaceuticals?" "The company will survive without me. The reforms are institutionalized now, the oversight mechanisms are permanent. But more importantly, I've realized that my purpose isn't tied to a corporate legacy. It's tied to making sure what we've started here spreads everywhere." That evening, they stood together on the roof garden of her temporary apartment, looking out over the Boston skyline. The Holloway Pharmaceuticals building dominated the view, its lights representing hundreds of employees working under the new ethical framework they'd established. "I keep thinking about that night at the charity ball," Serafina said. "If you'd told me then that everything I believed about my life was wrong, I never would have listened. If you'd told me I'd fall in love with a Holloway, I'd have said you were insane. Maybe we were both insane. Maybe that's what it took." Caspian pulled a small velvet box from his pocket, and Serafina's breath caught. "This isn't a business arrangement or a family obligation," he said, dropping to one knee. "This is a promise between two people who've seen each other at their worst and chosen to build something better together." The ring was simple, elegant, nothing like the ostentatious display Maximilian had presented months earlier. But it represented everything the other hadn't: choice, trust, and a future built on shared values rather than social expectations. "Serafina Holloway, will you marry me?" "Yes," she said without hesitation. "But I have one condition." "Anything." "When we get to Geneva, when we're building this new life together, we tell the whole truth. No more secrets, no more carefully managed revelations. Complete honesty, even when it's uncomfortable. Especially when it's uncomfortable." As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Serafina realized that everything she'd lost over the past year had been replaced by something infinitely more valuable. The company she'd inherited had been built on lies, but the partnership she was choosing was founded on truth. They were married 3 months later in a small ceremony at the harbor, with Agent Sarah Chun as maid of honor and the families of Brennan's victims in attendance. It wasn't the society wedding her parents had always envisioned, but it was authentic in a way that mattered more than appearances. The Thorn Rivers Foundation opened its Geneva headquarters 6 months after that, with Caspian as international director and Serafina leading corporate accountability initiatives. Their work took them around the world, investigating pharmaceutical fraud and building safeguards to protect vulnerable populations. Years later, when journalists asked about their unconventional love story, Serafina would always give the same answer. "Sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the courage to question everything you thought you knew about yourself." The revolution they'd started in a Boston boardroom had spread across continents, changing how pharmaceutical research was conducted and regulated. But their personal revolution, the transformation from enemies to partners to soulmates, remained the achievement they treasured most. In the end, they'd saved each other as much as they'd saved the industry they'd chosen to reform. And in a world where so much was built on deception, they'd created something rare and precious, a love story founded on absolute truth. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Thorn Rivers Foundation headquarters in Geneva, casting golden light across the spacious office where Serafina sat reviewing grant applications. Outside, Lake Geneva sparkled like scattered diamonds, and the Alps rose majestically in the distance. But her attention was focused on the proposal in front of her. A team of researchers in Sao Paulo had developed a revolutionary approach to clinical trial transparency, inspired by the protocols she and Caspian had pioneered after the Brennan scandal. Their methodology could prevent the kind of systematic fraud that had cost so many lives, including those of Caspian's parents. Another late night, she looked up to find her husband leaning against the doorframe, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, and an amused expression on his face. 5 years of marriage had only deepened her appreciation for the way he moved through the world with quiet confidence, though his hair now showed threads of silver at the temples. The Sao Paulo proposal is extraordinary. They want to create a global database of clinical trial data that no single corporation could manipulate or suppress. Caspian handed her a coffee and settled into the chair across from her desk, the same position he'd occupied countless times as they'd built their foundation from nothing into one of the most influential pharmaceutical oversight organizations in the world. Ambitious. Expensive too, I'd guess. 12 million over 3 years. But if it works, it could prevent another Brennan situation from ever happening again. Then we fund it. She smiled at his immediate certainty. They'd learned to trust each other's instincts completely over the years, whether they were evaluating research proposals or deciding which investigations to pursue. The board meeting isn't until next week. You don't want to review the proposal yourself. I trust your judgment. Besides, I have news that might interest you more. The anticipation in his voice made her set down her coffee. Good news or complicated news? Both. The Justice Department called this morning. They've arrested the pharmaceutical executives we identified in the Jakarta investigation. Apparently, our evidence was enough to trigger a multinational task force. The Jakarta case had consumed months of their attention, following trails of corruption that led from Switzerland to Indonesia to Mexico. It was exactly the kind of complex, international pharmaceutical fraud that the Foundation had been created to combat. That's incredible. How many people were involved? 47 arrests across 6 countries. The synthetic opioid network we uncovered was supplying cartels throughout Southeast Asia. 47, she repeated softly. The same number of patients who had died in Brennan's original trials. The deaths that had started their journey together. I thought you'd appreciate the symmetry. She stood and moved to the window, looking out at the peaceful lake while processing the magnitude of what they'd accomplished. 5 years ago, she'd been a naive heiress living in willful ignorance of her family's crimes. Now she was part of a global network of investigators, researchers, and activists working to transform an entire industry. Sometimes I can't believe this is our life, she said. Caspian joined her at the window, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. No regrets. None. Well, maybe one. Oh, I wish your parents could see what we've built together. What their sacrifice led to. She felt him tense slightly, the way he always did when his parents were mentioned. The grief would never completely fade, but it had transformed over the years into something productive rather than destructive. I think they can see it, he said quietly. I think they'd be proud that their deaths weren't meaningless, that something good came from all the pain. They'd be proud of you, of the man you became despite everything that happened. They'd be proud of us, of what we chose to build together. Their reflection in the window showed a couple who'd been tested by fire and emerged stronger. The naive heiress and the vengeful infiltrator were gone, replaced by partners who understood that love wasn't just about personal happiness, but about creating something larger than themselves. I have news too, Serafina said, turning in his arms. Dr. Martinez called from the clinic in Barcelona. The experimental treatment we funded for pediatric cancers has been approved for Phase 3 trials. The treatment based on your mother's research? Elena Holloway had spent her final years trying to atone for the company's past by developing treatments for childhood diseases. The irony that her work might save the lives that her husband's company had once endangered wasn't lost on either of them. If it works, it could help thousands of children, maybe tens of thousands. Your family's real legacy. As afternoon turned to evening, they walked along the lake shore, discussing plans for the Foundation's expansion into Africa and Asia. Their conversation was interrupted by Serafina's phone. It's Agent Chun, she told Caspian before answering. Sarah Chun had become more than just their FBI contact over the years. She was a close friend and godmother to the daughter they hoped to have someday. Sarah, what's wrong? You sound upset. Nothing's wrong. Everything's right. The pharmaceutical reform legislation passed the Senate an hour ago. Everything you two have been pushing for, all the oversight mechanisms, the transparency requirements, the victim compensation protocols. It's going to be federal law. Serafina sank onto a park bench, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they'd achieved. The legislation would transform pharmaceutical research throughout the United States, creating safeguards that would protect countless future patients. We did it, she whispered to Caspian. You did it, he corrected, sitting beside her. This was always your vision. Our vision. From that first night, when you showed me who Victor Brennan really was. As they watched the sun set over Lake Geneva, Serafina reflected on the journey that had brought them here. 5 years ago, she'd asked a janitor to accompany her to a charity ball, never imagining that the simple invitation would transform her life completely. Now they were partners in every sense of the word, bound together not just by love, but by shared purpose. They'd taken the pain of the past and transformed it into hope for the future. Ready to go home? Caspian asked as darkness fell. With you? Always. Hand in hand, they walked back toward their life together, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges, new investigations, new opportunities to make the world a little bit safer for the vulnerable people who depended on their work. It wasn't the fairy tale ending Serafina had once imagined for herself, but it was something infinitely more valuable, a love story built on truth, sustained by purpose, and destined to outlast them both.